Results of the US elections are going to shape the trajectory of India-US relations, and these are at a very crucial juncture. Just when the global economy is trying to turn a page and leave the scars of the pandemic behind, it becomes a pivotal point, so to speak. How will the India-US ties shape up with the outcome of elections? We're going to discuss this with our guest tonight. But first, the special report.
Republicans led by Donald Trump or Democrats led by Kamala Harris. The whole world is watching, and so is India. As Americans prepare to hit the polling booths, Donald Trump and Joe Biden have both left their imprints on Indo-U.S. ties. Donald Trump was always seen as favorable to India and Indian interests globally. Trump's criticism of Pakistan for supporting terrorism and China for its predatory economic and trade policies provided a boost to the India-US relationship. In November 2017, former First Daughter Ivanka Trump visited India for the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, a framework started by Obama. Trump also revived the Quad that includes the United States, Australia, Japan and India. Donald Trump-led administration also used its executive authority to designate India with the Strategic Trade Authorization 1 status via a federal notification. Donald Trump not only wanted to be close to India, but also to be seen as close to India. In September 2019, the then US President hosted Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Texas at an event attended by an estimated 50,000 people.
Mr. Donald Trump, a sense of leadership, a passion for America, a concern for every American, a belief in American future and a strong resolve.
But Trump was not kind when it came to trade tariffs. The jolt came when he labeled India as the tariff king and threatened to impose reciprocal tariffs on Indian products. But if Trump was supportive of India, his successor Joe Biden had his own way of deepening ties in defense, trade, health and climate change. After coming to office in 2021, the Biden National Security Council took forward several path-breaking steps. An initiative on critical and emerging technology, also known as the ISET, was launched in January 2023. This included exploring cooperation in artificial intelligence, quantum tech, cyber, 5G, 6G, biotech, semiconductors, defense and space. India has also gained considerable strategic significance during Biden administration, mainly due to China's rise and increasing assertiveness across Asia. The Biden administration continued the Trump administration's 2018 initiative of holding 2x2 meetings of foreign and defense ministers. Biden also continued with the Quad, increased sales of defense products, boosted joint drills and extensively shared intelligence with India. Under Biden's presidency, the two sides have also revived a number of platforms, including the India-US Trade Policy Forum, the India-US Commercial Dialogue, and the India-US CEO Forum. Under Biden's presidency, Indian PM Modi also addressed American Parliament.
In the past few years, there have been many advances in AI, artificial intelligence. At the same time, there have been even more momentous development in another AI, America and India.
A recent report by global financial services group Nomura said that President Donald Trump will be beneficial for India. The report added there can be possible frictions in bilateral trade due to Trump's policies, but these can be outweighed by supply chain benefits. The election outcome is not certain, but what's certain is that India-US ties will continue to deepen.
But the question also is, even if India-US ties are all set to deepen, under whose leadership are these ties going to get better? Is it going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? Let's ask Mukesh Aghi. He's President and CEO of USISPF, that is the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mr. Aghi, always a pleasure having you with us on India Tonight here on ET Now. A warm welcome to you. And as we wait for the outcome of the US presidential elections, there is clearly no doubt that an American president, the policies of his or her administration has a bearing on global trade, on diplomacy, on economic policies. Do you believe that Trump as president has been vastly different from Biden on those aspects when it comes to India-US relations?
Oh, Vikram, a pleasure to be on your show here. When you compare Trump or Biden, the approach has been very, very different. Trump was very transactional approach towards India, looking at issues and working on that, whereas Biden was a very structured approach, focused on Quad, focused on ISET, focused on initiatives on the chip factors, focused on trying to look at the cancer initiative. So I think both have been very different, but you have to understand very clearly, regardless who comes in, India becomes critical part of US strategy on a long-term basis. And multiple factors play into that strategy. One is the rise of China, the aggressive posture of China, which is basically pushing US to basically contain China from that perspective. But more important is US companies. They like to de-risk their supply chain from China, and India becomes very pivotal and critical for those companies. It's not just about de-risking supply chain. It's also about trying to gain access to the growing Indian market, which is a $4 trillion economy, will become a $5 trillion economy by 2027, and keep on growing from that perspective. So I think regardless of who comes in, India is going to be critical for US both in the short and the long term.
Mr. Aghi, don't you believe that the Biden administration has concentrated a lot more on domestic manufacturing, reducing reliance on global supply chains like they've done through the Inflation Reduction Act? It provides subsidies to American manufacturers, which also means that there is less space for Indian companies, wouldn't you say?
No, absolutely. I think the IRA basically has given incentive, but you have to understand, we have a shortage of labor. We have a shortage of skills in the United States, and that's where India plays a pivotal role. We have excess supply of labor. We have tremendous skills. When you look at global capability centers, India is building roughly around 1,700 of those capability centers. We're bringing tremendous amount of IP and export of services from those IP capability centers. So I think regardless of what direction you go by encouraging manufacturing in the US, the big share of the pie will come to India because we have a skill shortage, we have labor shortage, and that's where India becomes very critical for the US companies.
Specifically, do you see that upward trajectory, technology, infrastructure, there's renewable energy, there's manufacturing, American investments also in India and these sectors is likely to change depending on which of these two comes into power, right?
No, absolutely. I think you have to look at today, America is self-sufficient on energy. In fact, it has surplus energy at the moment. But India is playing a pivotal role on the renewable side, building its own base, industrial base from that perspective. You have to keep in mind, it's not just about economy itself. I think what we've learned from Ukraine war is that countries which have a long, strong industrial base can sustain if you get into a war in the long-term basis. US has that issue at the moment because a lot of manufacturing got moved out to China. And what we have seen is Biden administration effort to revive the industrial base in India itself. When you look at the manufacture of Javelin, when you look at manufacture of Stinger missiles, and now the Stryker, basically mobility vehicles. So what we are seeing is a massive movement of leveraging India's industrial base, benefiting the US economy, and also long-term strategic values. So I think regardless of who comes in, India's need will get much more pivotal for US companies, US economy, and US from a geopolitical perspective.
Concern you, Mr. Aghi, that Donald Trump has historically favored protectionist trade policies. He's focused on America First principles, and in his term, he imposed tariffs on various goods, and those include Indian exports as well, which led to trade tensions between India and the US. Even now, he's ramping up the higher tariffs and calling out India for that. He's referred to India as the biggest charger of tariffs alongside China and Brazil, of course. He's reiterated complaints from American businesses like Harley-Davidson that he says have struggled with India's 150% tariff. So do you see him fostering trade ties with India with as much gusto if he returns as president?
No, absolutely. I think you have to understand his understanding of making America great again, his understanding of trying to create more jobs is tariff. Where we basically have a challenge is tariffs basically impact the local consumer. He has talked about putting 200% tariff on Chinese goods. He's talked about putting higher tariffs on Indian goods itself. So we do see some kind of a stress factor coming in early on in his presidency. You look at Harley-Davidson. Yes, he complained about 150% tariffs by India on Harley vehicles coming to India. But you have to understand, that time on the average, India was bringing in roughly around 160 Harley-Davidson. So nothing in the bigger scheme itself. I think the challenge we're going to have is India has a trade surplus with the U.S. and the focus of Trump administration is going to be how do you reduce the trade surplus. So yes, I believe that if they go in the direction, when I say they means Trump administration goes in the direction of putting high tariffs, that is going to create some kind of a stress factor early on. But I believe there's enough maturity on both sides to find a viable solution. So geopolitically, the relationship don't get impacted.
Mr. Aghi, for India, US is the largest, among the largest trade partners with bilateral trade now close to $120 billion. This is in FY24. But if Trump does return to power, do you see challenges for several exports? We've spoken about textiles and pharmaceuticals and agricultural goods. But to be able to tackle that, maybe perhaps through a US-India trade agreement, do you think that is possible, whether it's under Trump or Harris? Where is it more likely, according to you? Where are the chances brighter of getting a trade agreement between the two countries?
Well, I think the Biden administration avoided doing trade agreement with anybody because they were looking at the labor unions, trying to make sure that the vote bank there does not get misdirected itself. Trump, I believe, will be interested in doing a trade deal. You have to understand in the Quad, which is the four countries, Japan, Australia, India, and the US, the total economy between the four countries, or GDP, is around $35 trillion. When you look at from that perspective, Japan has a trade agreement with the US, Australia has a trade agreement with the US, India has some kind of a trade agreement with Japan, India has some kind of a trade agreement with Australia. So why can't we basically get India and US to have a trade agreement? If nothing else, align geopolitical strategy to economic strategy. Get the four countries into one single platform and drive us a common market from that perspective. And you can see a win-win in every aspect. So one of the key initiatives we are basically directing with the Trump potential administration or with Kamala Harris administration is looking at the Quad not only just from a geopolitical perspective, but driving that into economic agreement and a trade agreement so you can drive a flawlessly trade process between all four countries itself.
The geopolitical arena as well. Mr. Aghi, both Harris and Trump, they're expected to maintain this strong focus on the Indo-Pacific region. India plays a critical role just as a counterbalance for the US when it comes to Chinese influence. You spoke about that. And this now particularly within the framework of the Quad alliance, which of course has Australia and Japan besides India and the US. But will it work better under Trump or Harris, you think?
I think when you look at from a trade agreement perspective, I strongly believe Trump will drive that because I think he's looking at trying to create more jobs, and he strongly believes that the trade agreements do help. Whereas from a geopolitical perspective, regardless of it's Harris or Trump, they see China as a biggest challenge. China, which is becoming much more aggressive, much more assertive, and a nation which US has dealt for the first time, which military is very powerful, economically very strong, and technologically is very advanced. So both, regardless of it's Trump or Harris, will deal with China in the same manner. And that's where I think India becomes pivotal. So it is important that, and our recommendation to both incoming potential administration is that look at India not just from a geopolitical perspective, but look at also from an economic perspective. Leverage the skills, the IP, the IQ of Indian workforce, because we have a shortage in skills in that area in the U.S.
Yes.
So to answer your question, I think both will look at China as a threat. Both will leverage India from that perspective.
Right. In that address of the Prime Minister, when he was in the US, he spoke about artificial intelligence. Of course, he extended it to America and India. But when it comes to areas like cyber defense or artificial intelligence, collaboration like in space, and this happening through forums like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, the IPEF and the Quad, do you see both of them again pushing that agenda? Or do you think one would do it slightly better than the other?
I think you have to understand that wherever there's a technology transfer, Trump will question that. Why are we giving our technology free to India without getting anything in return? Whereas in the Biden administration, they looked at the cooperation on quantum, cooperation on cyber or AI as a win-win value proposition. So I think you will see a certain shift taking place if Trump comes in a lot of this advanced technology transfer. But we have to explain to them it's not just a one-way street. AI, for example, yes, US has the algorithm, but India will have that pivotal data to be able to run those large algorithms to find the right solution itself. So it is a win-win value proposition. So I think there has to be a lot of education done on part of our organization to explain that it's a win-win value proposition. Otherwise, we feel that the Harris administration will continue with the Biden agenda, whereas you'll see some shift taking place if Trump comes in the technology transfer to India, specifically in the quantum, AI, and cyber space itself.
Back in India, we are talking a lot about Kamala Harris's personal connection with India, and one wonders whether this is going to help strengthen diplomatic relations as well, perhaps through more people-to-people ties, educational exchanges between the two countries, and that could help strengthen diplomacy and the kind of relations that India and US have. Do you see it that way?
So I see it other way, because you have to understand that having a mother from India, she will maintain some kind of distance with India just to show that she's being neutral with India itself. So, and what we have seen from a track record also, there have been more questioning from the Democratic left on India's human right, on India's religious freedom, and other aspect of not doing the trade aspect. So we don't see a accelerated movement coming from the Harris administration towards India, whereas from Trump, what we see is he has no hesitation. He has a great relationship with the Prime Minister, and he will make some pivotal decision without any hesitation, because he has no baggage as far as India goes from a heritage perspective. So we see Trump driving that much more aggressively rather than the Harris administration itself.
I don't know if you agree, Mr. Aghi. There was some kind of skepticism around Democrats, but the way they have handled this entire controversy surrounding India and Canada, do you think this is an indication that relations between India and the US is coming of age?
No, I think the issues are very different between Canada and India and the US, especially on the Panam case and Niger case. In the case of US, they provided evidence, and the whole process was not driven by the Biden administration. It was driven by the Justice Department. And so what we saw was that India responded in a very mature manner, provided all the evidence, basically took care of the issue of Vikas Yadav in India itself. So I think there was a lot of maturity on part of Biden administration to deal with that issue. Whereas in the case of Canada, you had a prime minister who was just trying to sacrifice a relationship with India to salvage his own prime ministership. And that means he drove the whole process. He's the one who accused, without any credible evidence, that India has been accused of basically carrying the hijab on Niger itself. So I think both were very, very separate. The process were very different. And I think India responded to US in a very mature manner. So did India reacted to Canada. But I think the process driven was very political on the part of Canadians as far as, and you have to understand the issue is not between India and Canada here. The issue was between India and Trudeau itself. So what we see is a lack of maturity on part of Canadian Prime Minister, whereas the Justice Department drove it in a much more mature manner, and India reacted in that manner also.
So overall, before we wrap it up, Mr. Aghi, what is the best case scenario from where you stand, from where your organization is looking at the possibility of having either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris as president? What is the best case scenario for India?
So I think the way we see it is regardless who comes in, the geopolitical partnership between the two countries will continue in the upward trajectory. The economic partnership will continue again in the upward trajectory. We see US companies ramping up more and more manufacturing in India. We see India getting more and more into global supply chain. You have 5 million plus Indian Americans making almost 1.5% of the population, but they're generating almost 6% of the GDP of the United States. They will play a very pivotal role, drive 6% of the GDP of the United States. They will play a very pivotal role driving this relationship from people to people. So I strongly believe that regardless of who comes in, this relationship will continue to be much more deeper, broader, and upward trajectory.
Fingers crossed on that. We will be waiting for the outcome of the US presidential elections, as I'm sure you will, Mr. Aghi. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective. Very insightful conversation, as always. Thanks for joining us on ET Now.
Thank you, Vikram.
Meanwhile, we're watching with...
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.